Tom Gulley Show with our cold open. Tonight, let me tell you about the polygraph test. Known to most people as the lie detector test. Really, polygraph test is a misnomer as a term. The real term is just polygraph. Polygraph is the name of the test they give. I don't know how many of you out there listening right now have ever thought about, while you're watching a movie or hearing about a true crime story, what would I do if I had to take a polygraph test and I was innocent? Or even some of you, I'm sure a decided few, may be thinking, well, how would I pass one if I'm not innocent. And for those of you, shame on you. But we will be telling you some things about the polygraph that will blow your mind. You will not believe them. I definitively will tell you right now, you are going to learn some things about the polygraph that you, A, did not know, and B, probably will have a little trouble believing. I'm not joking around here. It's the truth. That being said, the reason we do the cold open is we are a live streaming YouTube program, and we need some time for, the people to stream into our chat room. And that's because, they got to get notified, then they got to figure out whether they want to listen to the show, and then, you know what I'm saying. All the things. So we'll do that. And while we do that, we usually play some songs our musical director, Leon Kennedy, has created that are about the show a little bit and that are real toe tappers that keep you company. And that's what we're going to do right now. So let me tell you about the polygraph test. Let me tell you about the groove.
to go far, popping some pills for the man with the Letterman star. And if Tom came to your country, would you keep him for a while, surrounding yourself in his familiar smile? And when he comes around, the stadiums fill up fully. They shout, "Is that him, Mr. Gulley? Is that Tom? It's Tom Gulley." They yell, "Is that him, Mr. Gulley? Is that Tom? It's Tom Gulley." They say, "Is that him, Mr. Gulley? Is that Tom? It's Tom Gulley."
Hey, everybody, what's going on? What's hot? What's hip? What's happening? What is shaking? Tonight, let me tell you about the polygraph test. I'll get to that in just a second. But before I do, please like, share, subscribe, retweet, notification bell, all the absolutely free things you can do to help our little show out and to help us with the algorithm, the almighty, all-powerful, all-knowing algorithm, which for some reason lately just doesn't seem to like us. Look, there's valid reasons for the algorithm, as well as just people in general, not to like this show, but I like some help with that. Also, we have super chats, we have memberships, we have gifted memberships, or you can go to the TomGulleyShow.com. There's podcasts there, there's our merchandise store there, and of course, there's always the PayPal. We love the PayPal. That's where you give the most, I get the most, and Google doesn't get anything, and it's all in the description of our YouTube programs. If you're listening in an audio podcast form, or if you just like to, we're on Podbean, we're on Apple Podcast, we're on Spotify, we're on iHeart, we're everywhere. Everywhere fine podcasts are given away for free. We're there. Let's talk a little bit about the polygraph test. Now, the real term for that is just polygraph. And that serves for lie detector test, which it's often called, and polygraph test. I'm sure you've seen movies. I'm sure you've seen TV shows. I'm sure you've even seen real-life true crime shows where they'll mention, well, he didn't pass a polygraph test, or he passed a polygraph test. I'm going to tell you tonight why that doesn't mean the same thing you think it does, and it may not mean anything to you by the time I'm done telling you about the polygraph. Just right out of the gate for starters, the polygraph, which is incorrectly referred to as a lie detector test. When they say that, that's not what the polygraph does. That may be what other people think its function is, but that's not what it does. It does not detect lies. In fact, the polygraph is a pseudoscientific device or procedure that measures several physiological indicators like blood pressure or pulse or respiration or skin conductivity when a person is asked a series of questions. Now, what does pseudoscientific mean? Well, pseudoscientific just means beliefs or statements or practices that claim to be scientific or factual, but are not compatible with the scientific method of proving things, okay? It has a scientific element because blood pressure is a scientific measurement, and so is pulse, and so is respiration, and even skin conductivity. But the actual polygraph itself, it's pseudoscience. And this is important because in some countries, they're used for interrogation tools, like in our country. They're not legitimate in court, but they are used in questioning of suspects, and law enforcement particularly has embraced the polygraph. That's why it's used so much. The federal government also uses it to screen people from certain positions. So you may be even asked to take one for a job of some kind, depending. Now, just what happens when you are asked to take a polygraph? Pazed Patriot is here. Hey, Paz, what's going on, brother? Good to see you. What happens when you're asked to take a polygraph? What do they actually make you do or ask you to do? Depending. Well, the examiner usually begins the test session with a pre-test interview to get some preliminary information they'll use to develop diagnostic questions, okay? And that may be, what's your name? Have you ever been married? How many kids do you have? And then the person conducting the test will explain how it is supposed to work, emphasizing that it can detect lies and that you must answer truthfully. And then they do what's called a STEM test, usually. And that's when the subject is asked to deliberately lie. They would ask you to deliberately lie, and they will measure the results of your blood pressure and your respiration and the rest of it when you deliver this lie up to them. So they can say, okay, that's what it looks like when they lie. And the tester reports usually that they were able to detect this lie. Guilty subjects, people that are guilty, are more likely to become more anxious as they are repeatedly reminded of the validity of the polygraph. So that's going to affect the outcome of the test. However, the problem here is innocent people also become more anxious. In fact, in many times, they become more anxious than guilty people who are used to lying. They don't react quite as much. But then the actual test begins. Some of the questions asked are completely irrelevant. Is your name Pazed Patriot? Others are the actual diagnostic questions, okay? And the remainder are relevant questions. And those are the ones that the tester is really interested in. Have you ever stole anything from this workplace? And they alternate these types of questions. And the test is passed if the responses to the diagnostic questions are larger than those during the relevant questions. Okay, so the diagnostic question that they asked you at the beginning of the test, if it's bigger, the reaction is larger than the relevant questions, they believe you're telling the truth. If the relevant questions they asked about what's going on exceed those diagnostic questions, they will determine that you are being evasive or not truthful. Okay? Now, the criticisms of the polygraph are because of the validity of the administration of what they call the control question technique. In other words, they're asking you questions that they're going to use as a benchmark to decide whether you're lying or telling the truth. And the reasons for that is they're conducted in an interrogation-like fashion. And being interrogated is likely to elicit a nervous response from guilty people, certainly, but also from innocent people. And there's a lot of other ways to administer these questions. Like in Japan, they use what's called a guilty knowledge test, okay? And that kind of test has actually been developed to avoid interrogating someone. The test is usually conducted by someone who has no knowledge of the crime or the circumstances in question, none whatsoever. And the administrator tests the person taking the test on their knowledge of the crime that would not be known to an innocent person. Like, was the crime committed with a hammer or a baseball bat? The innocent person doesn't know. And then the answers are, going to follow from the multiple choices that they're offered. And that's likely to make a person less apprehensive or less interrogated, if you will. Now, I'm going to tell you about the effectiveness of the polygraph, and it's going to blow your mind. It's really going to blow your mind, given how long and how effectively we've been told for years and years and years in TV shows and movies and police departments that this thing is effective. Yes. Julian Caesar says, Tom, we've all heard that these results are not admitted in court, but do you think there's a chance if both sides deliberately ask the judge to allow it, the judge would admit it into evidence? Julian Caesar, I doubt it. I'm no legal expert, far from it. But the reason for that, I will tell you in just a few minutes. Jean is here. She says the man who invented the polygraph made the Wonder Woman comics. Funny, she has a rope that makes you tell the truth. That is funny. And I'll show you one of the major inventors of it here in just a second. Tim Jenkinson says, aren't they useless as they couldn't be used in court? Well, Tim, here's the thing. They can't be used in court as a matter of fact, but they can be used during an investigation. If you have 3 suspects, and this is a totally law enforcement viewpoint, by the way. A scientist wouldn't say this. But if you have 3 suspects and you give them all polygraphs, the one that is showing the most deception is perhaps the one who did it, and you might look into them more. You might clear somebody. In addition, it's used to screen employees. So if you don't pass the test on a certain question or thing, they may look into that more, or they may just have a policy, which companies are legally allowed to have, that if you don't pass this, we don't hire you for the position. Johnny Brooks says, dear God, it says, for the Tom Gulley Show. I don't know that we should go that far. But why not? If you'd like to thank him, please go ahead. Chef says Jimmy Stewart used one in Calls Northside 777, if I'm correct. Yes, they were very, very popular for movies and TV shows because there's that illusion that they are actually detecting a lie and that it is scientific. It looks scientific. Look, if you're watching and not listening to our audio podcast, look at the photo I have on here. It's a series of knobs. There's a graph. There's things making 3 different kinds of graphs on a piece of paper. Someone's got a blood pressure cuff on them. They're looking straight forward. It looks scientific. It sounds scientific. Blood pressure, respiration, heart rate, But let me just tell you, assessments of the polygraph by scientific and government bodies generally suggest, and these government bodies are not law enforcement, they're external to law enforcement. They generally suggest that polygraphs are inaccurate, may be defeated by what are called countermeasures, and are an imperfect or invalid method of assessing truthfulness. Despite claims that polygraph tests are between 80% and 90% accurate by the people that really believe in the polygraph, the National Research Council has found no, and I'm going to repeat this, no evidence of effectiveness. And the National Research Council is from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, also known as the National Academies. It's a congressionally chartered organization that serves as the collective scientific National Academy of the United States of America. These aren't some schmucks with an axe to grind, okay? In particular, studies have indicated the relevant-irrelevant questioning technique is not ideal. as many innocent subjects exert a heightened physiological reaction to the test as guilty people. The American Psychological Association states most psychologists agree that there is little evidence that polygraph tests can accurately detect lies. In 2002, a review by the National Research Council found that in populations untrained in countermeasures, they have no training in how to subvert the test. Specific incident polygraph tests can discriminate lying from truth at rates well above chance, though well below perfection. So it's better than 50%, but not much. The review also warns against generalizations from these findings to justify the use of polygraphs. They say polygraph accuracy, for screening purposes is almost certainly lower than what can be achieved by specific incident polygraph tests in the field. In other words, they're not good. And to Julian Zeezer's earlier question, in the 1998 U.S. Supreme Court case, United States versus Sheffer, the majority opinion stated, there is simply no consensus that polygraph evidence is reliable. Unlike other expert witnesses who testify about factual matters, such as the analysis of fingerprints, ballistics, or DNA found at a crime scene, a polygraph expert can supply the jury only with opinion. The Supreme Court summarized their findings, and this is really damning toward the polygraph. The Supreme Court summarized their findings that use of the polygraph was, quote, little better than could be obtained by the toss of a coin. In 2005, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals stated, polygraphy does not enjoy general acceptance from the scientific community. Polygraphs measure arousal, which can be affected by anxiety disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder, which a person that has just had someone close to them harmed might have, can also be caused by nervousness, which you might have if you're being accused of a crime you didn't commit, fear, confusion, hypoglycemia, psychosis, depression, substance-induced states, nicotine, stimulants, substance withdrawal state, alcohol withdrawal, drug withdrawal. You know, somebody that's an alcoholic or a drug addict gets pulled into the pokey, and then 2 days later they're given a polygraph. They're in withdrawal. Polygraphs do not measure, also, even people in the polygraph business will tell you, polygraphs do not measure lies. And a polygraph cannot differentiate between anxiety caused by dishonesty and anxiety caused by something else. The U.S. Congress Office of Technology Assessment in 1983 published a review of polygraph technology and found that there is at present only limited scientific evidence for establishing the validity of polygraph testing. Even where the evidence seems to indicate that polygraph testing detects deceptive subjects better than chance, significant rates of error are possible. And examiner and examinee differences and the use of countermeasures may exacerbate that whole thing. Yeah. I'll tell you some more stuff about it here in a second. You're not going to like hearing it. Julian Zeezer says, watch the polygraph examination of murderer Chris Watts on YouTube to see how a skilled examiner can use the polygraph to get a witness on the record. And Julian, that's another thing that a polygraph is useful for. It is useful in interrogation. It's useful for getting people on the record. It's useful for making people say yes or no to a thing. That doesn't necessarily mean they're telling the truth. In 2003, the National Academy of Sciences issued a report. Hold on here. I had this picture up forever. Mostly because I like the 70s more than anything else. Now you got to look at me. Good luck with all that. Good luck with all that. In 2003, the National Academy of Sciences issued a report, and they called the report the Polygraphy and Lie Detection. The NAS found that overall the evidence is scanty and scientifically weak, concluding that 57 of the approximately 80 research studies that the American Polygraph Association, people that believe in the polygraph, relied on to reach their conclusions were significantly flawed. Significantly. These studies did show that specific incident polygraph testing in a person untrained in any of the countermeasures, and I'm going to tell you about the countermeasures in just a second, could discern the truth at a level greater than chance, yet sort of perfection. I told you that earlier. However, due to several flaws, the levels of accuracy shown in these studies are almost certainly higher than polygraph accuracy. Yeah. When polygraphs are used as a screening tool in national security matters and for law enforcement agencies, for example, the level of accuracy drops to such a level that, quote, its accuracy in distinguishing actual or potential security violators, can't talk this year. Distinguishing accurate rented lips. Distinguishing actual or potential security violators from innocent test takers is insufficient to justify reliance on its use in employee screening in federal agencies. And they even said it may have some utility, it may have some usefulness in the world, but there is little basis for the expectation that a polygraph test could have extremely high accuracy. Now, let me tell you about some of these countermeasures, because there's countermeasures. You've heard sometimes, like on Law and Order or something, a guy puts a tack in his shoe or something, does something to physiologically alter his body's reaction to stuff. Well, several proposed countermeasures designed to pass polygraph tests have been described. There are two major types of countermeasures. Okay, the general state intending to alter physiological or psychological state of mind during the test, and two, specific point, and that's intended to alter the physiological or psychological state at specific points during the examination. So basically the countermeasures are generally throughout the entire test, or specifically when you're asked the stuff that could get you in trouble. Yeah. Let's talk about the general state one, the general polygraph countermeasure. When asked how he passed the polygraph test, Central Intelligence Agency officer, turned KGB mole Aldrich Ames explained that he sought advice from his Soviet handler and received the simple instruction to, quote, get a good night's sleep and rest and go into the test relaxed. Be nice to the polygraph examiner. Develop a rapport with them and be cooperative and try to maintain your calm. Additionally, Aldrich Ames, CIA guy turned commie turncoat, said there is no special magic. Confidence is what does it. Confidence and a friendly relationship with the examiner. Rapport, where you smile and make you think that you like him. Apparently, that's one way to countermeasure an intense interrogation, okay? Now let's talk about the specific point, the exact moment that you want to countermand what's going on with the polygraph. Other suggestions for countermeasures include for the subject to mentally record the control and relevant questions as the examiner reviews them before the interrogation begins. I told you earlier about those questions that they ask before it begins. During the interrogation, the subject is supposed to carefully control their breathing while answering the relevant questions and try to artificially increase their heart rate during the control questions. So think of something scary or exciting, or use that tack in the shoe. This way, the results will not show a significant reaction to any of the relevant questions. What do you think about that? Let me show you all a little something here real quick. It's something that I got. It's a brochure of the Defense Security Service. Okay? That's a federal security and defense agency of the United States Department of Defense, and reports to the Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. And they use the polygraph to screen people, and I would assume also to interrogate people. Well, they put out a brochure. I happen to have the brochure. Check it out, check it out, check it out. Yeah, for those of you listening in audio, I'm going to be reading elements of this right now. It's very well designed, by the way. And it's by the way, the name of the brochure, it's almost like the name of a film you'd see in health class or something. Your polygraph examination, an important appointment to keep. And they've got a little box there, date of polygraph, time of polygraph, location of polygraph. So they send these out, hand them out, before this happens. And it says, prior to your appointment, get a good night's sleep, follow your normal routine, take your regular medications, don't skip any meals, come with an open mind. It's a unique experience each time. Allow enough time in your schedule. Arrive early. Okay. Now, the test requirements. Questions are directly related to counterintelligence and suitability. Examinee must be in good physical and mental health. Test is voluntary and can be terminated at any time. Examinee must sign an interview consent form. All questions are reviewed prior to testing. So all the questions they're going to ask you, they review before they even, conduct the test. Examiner training. Graduates of Defense Academy for Credibility Assessment. So they're accredited examiners. Federally certified examiners. All of them are special agents. All of them have a minimum of a bachelor's degree and 80 hours of continuing education biannually. There you go. And there are health considerations. The polygraph components are not invasive. The polygraph instrument uses sensors placed on an individual to monitor and record their physiology during the testing phase. It is highly unusual for any medical condition, past or present, to interfere with the polygraph or the results. What do you think about that? check that out while I get to some of your comments. The chef says, I bet you $1 the senior lecturer would know things about this. Yes, my sister, the senior lecturer in behavioral psychology, would definitely know about this. I should have asked her about it before the show. Julian Caesar says, polygraph as a screening to just give the organization an excuse to say whatever they want about you. It could be. Wade Curtis says, I love interesting topics like this. Great show. Soup Party says, hair looks good today, Tom. Hit the like button. Soup Party, I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm really not. Because I, from time to time, have watched your show. Anytime that you're castigating a certain person, I'll watch it. But I don't think I've ever said your hair looks good on the show. Hopefully you're laughing right now. He does say hit the like button, and I do appreciate that. Gene says, sounds like you are getting a colonoscopy. No, I would say a colonoscopy is much more invasive than this. You're getting a mental colonoscopy, maybe, but good observation. Now, here's the other side of this brochure. Question areas. Counterintelligence. They're going to ask you about espionage, sabotage, terroristic activity, deliberate damage of any U.S. government information system, international compromise of the U.S., government classified information or material, secret contact with a foreign national or representative, and then they're going to ask you about suitability, involvement in a serious crime, personal involvement with illegal drugs during the last 7 years, deliberate falsification of the security forms, and then confidentiality. Your polygraph is held in the strictest confidence. We ask that you maintain confidentiality regarding your polygraph examination and do not discuss it with acquaintances, friends, family, or coworkers. How about the press? Can you discuss it with the press? I'm gonna go through some of them. What they have is frequently asked questions. This is the government. This is the Department of Defense. Will nervousness affect my test? Nervousness is expected and is accounted for during the test. How long will the test take? The average test length falls between 2 and 4 hours. Everyone's life experience is different, and the test length reflects directly to those experiences. How can I be successful in my polygraph examination? Speak candidly about your life experiences. Ask questions. Follow your examiner's instructions and maintain your focus throughout the process. What about the information I read on the internet about the polygraph process? There's a great deal of unverified information on the internet about polygraph. Talk to your examiner about the information you read. Ask your doctor if polygraph is right for you. Anyway. What about things my coworkers told me? Will I feel the components during testing? Will my examiner tell me the test results? The answer to that one is no. Every test we conduct goes through a quality control process. Only after that quality control process is completed can we provide official results. What should I do if I don't understand something? Don't be afraid to ask questions. Am I a commie? What's the test say? Anyway. This hair needs to be cut, by the way. I'm just saying. Who uses the polygraph? Law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies in the United States, not other places, are by far the largest users of polygraph technology. In the United States alone, most federal law enforcement agencies either employ their own polygraph examiners or use the services of examiners employed by other agencies. In 1978, Richard Helms, the 8th director of the CIA, said, We discovered there were some Eastern Europeans who could defeat the polygraph at any time. Americans are not very good at it because we are raised to tell the truth, and when we lie, it's easy to tell when we're lying. But we find a lot of Europeans and Asians that can handle the polygraph without a blip, and you know they're lying, and you have evidence that they are lying. Susan McCarthy of Salon Magazine said in 2000 that the polygraph is an American phenomenon with limited use in a few countries such as Canada, Israel, and Japan. So it's our gig, man. It's our gig. The US of A. Nobody is here. He said, did I just hear the great Tom Gulley is a commie? No. Tim Jenkins says they also use waterboarding, though. Well, they do. They do. Which also has really poor results at getting people to tell the truth. Waterboarding and torture are terrible ways to get good information because the person being waterboarded or tortured will tell you anything to make the waterboarding or the torturing stop. In 2018, Wired magazine reported that an estimated 2.5 million polygraph tests were given each year in the United States, which has the majority of them given to paramedics, police officers, firefighters, and state troopers. The average cost to administer the test is more than $700, and it's part of a $2 billion a year industry. By the way, like, share, subscribe, retweet, notification bell, all the free things you can do to help the show out and help me out with the algorithm, the almighty, all-powerful, all-knowing algorithm. Plus, also, as well, in addition to, we have super chats, we have memberships, gifted memberships, and then we have the PayPal, where you give the most, I get the most. All of it's in the description of our YouTube program. I'd like to thank the chef with a very kind, generous donation on PayPal. Much appreciated, Chef. Thank you so much. And also then go to the TomGulleyShow.com. Our merch store's there. A lot of other podcasts and fun stuff. And can you dig it? There. That commercial's over with. In 2007, polygraph testimony was admitted by stipulation in 19 states. And that just means in those 19 states, if one side or another stipulates, as Julian Zeeser was mentioning earlier, if one side, if they stipulate to it and say, yeah, we're willing to let that stand, you can do it. But it is subjected to the discretion of the trial judge in federal court. Now, keep in mind, most prosecutors and a lot of defense attorneys are not going to use the polygraph because the Supreme Court doesn't recognize it. So it's an easy overturn, depending. The use of polygraph in court testimony remains controversial, although it is used extensively in post-conviction supervision. Yeah. Yes. Even though polygraphs are commonly used in police investigations in the United States, no defendant or witness can be forced to undergo the test unless they're already under the supervision of the courts, which generally means you're not guilty of something already. In that case I told you about from 1998, the United States versus Sheffer, the U.S. Supreme Court left it up to individual jurisdictions whether polygraph tests could be admitted as evidence in court cases. Nevertheless, it is used by prosecutors, defense attorneys, and law enforcement agencies. In the states of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, Oregon, Delaware, and Iowa, it is illegal for any employer to order a polygraph either as a condition of getting a job or to figure out whether they did something wrong. The Employee Polygraph Protection Act of 1988 generally prevents employers from using lie detector tests, either for pre-employment screening or during the course of employment, with certain exceptions. And of course, we've listed several of those here, law enforcement, defense, things of that nature. As of 2013, about 70,000 job applicants are polygraphed by the federal government on an annual basis. That's every year. In the United States, the state of New Mexico admits polygraph testing in jury trials under certain circumstances. Can you dig it? Say, Tom, how did they start polygraphing people? How did that get started? Who is in charge of that? I'm glad you asked, listener. The polygraph was invented in 1921 by John Augustus Larson, a medical student at the University of California, Berkeley, and also he happened to be a police officer of the Berkeley Police Department. The polygraph was on the Encyclopedia Britannica 2003 list of greatest inventions, described as inventions that, quote, have had profound effects on human life for better or worse. In 2013, the U.S. federal government had begun indicting individuals who stated they were teaching methods on how to defeat a polygraph test. During one of those investigations, upwards of 30 federal agencies were involved in investigations of almost 5,000 people who had various degrees of contact with those being prosecuted or those who had purchased books or DVDs on how to beat the polygraph. The gentleman that you see here is not, by the way, John Augustus Larson. It's a guy named Legrand that I will tell you about in just a second that helped out. Security clearances. Yeah. In 1995, Harold James Nicholson, a CIA employee later convicted of spying for Russia, had undergone his periodic 5-year reinvestigation in which he showed a strong probability of deception on questions regarding relationships with a foreign intelligence unit. This polygraph test was later led to an investigation which resulted in his eventual arrest and convictions. In most cases, though, polygraphs are more of a scare tool to scare straight those who would consider espionage. Yeah. And there's a number of examples. In 1983, CIA employee Edward Lee Howard was dismissed when, during a polygraph screening, he truthfully answered a series of questions admitting to minor crimes like petty theft and drug abuse. In retaliation for being dismissed this way, he sold his knowledge of CIA operations to the Soviet Union. Hey, now. Hey. And there are multiple examples of polygraph tests not deterring espionage. Ana Belén Montes, a Cuban spy, passed a counterintelligence scope polygraph test administered by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency in 1994. Now, despite all these errors and problems, in August of 2008, the Defense Intelligence Agency announced that it would subject each of its 5,700 prospective and current employees to polygraph testing at least once annually. This expansion ignored all the documented technical problems discovered in the polygraph system. Yeah. There are some alternate tests, voice stress tests, things of that nature. I won't go into those into detail, but the polygraph that we currently use is not the first thing that people use to detect lying. Earlier societies utilized elaborate methods of lie detection, which, well, they mainly involved torture. In the Middle Age, boiling water was used. It was believed if you were honest, you would withstand the boiling water better than a liar. Yeah. But early devices include 1895 Cesare Lombroso, used to measure changes in blood pressure for the police. And in 1904, Vittorio Benuzzi, used to measure breathing. Yeah. They also used it to test German prisoners of war in World War I. They claim there was a strong positive correlation between systolic blood pressure and lying. He was a liar. The man that was mentioned by Gene just a few minutes ago, American William Moulton Marston, he was an interesting guy. He went to Harvard Law School. He'd already written papers on lie detection from physiological measurements. He graduated Harvard in 1918 and republished his work that he had done before graduation. The main inspiration for the device was his wife, Elizabeth Holloway Marston. According to Marston's son, it was his mother, Elizabeth, who suggested to him that when she got mad or excited, her blood pressure seemed to climb. Yeah. Despite the things that had been done before him in Italy and other places, Marston started kind of positioning himself as the father of the polygraph. Today, he is more often known as the creator of the character Wonder Woman and her lasso of truth. But he remained the primary advocate of the polygraph, at least as he had envisioned it, in the courts. And he published a book in 1938, The Lie Detector Test. And then also in 1938, he appeared in advertising by the Gillette Company, claiming that the polygraph test showed Gillette razors were better than the competition. But a device recording both blood pressure and breathing was invented by the guy we talked about earlier in 1921, John Augustus Larson, University of California. And he first applied that test in law enforcement work by the Berkeley Police Department. Further work on the device, though, was done by Leonard Keeler, who you see in front of you now if you're watching our YouTube program. And he added the galvanic skin response to it in 1939. What's the galvanic skin response? Well, it's the property of the human body that causes continuous variation in the electrical characteristics of the skin. It's also been known as skin conductivity, electrodermal response, psychogalvanic reflex, known by a lot of other names. They can't get enough of naming it stuff. Anyway, Keeler updated his advice, making it portable, adding the galvanic skin response, and then his device was purchased by the FBI, and that is the prototype of the modern polygraph. The machine is sometimes called a cardiosphygmomanometer, by the way. Let's see if there's any comments in our chat room. And then I'll get into some of the uses in media, which have really kind of mischaracterized the reasons they use a polygraph test, to be honest with you. Where are we at here? Here we go. Sky's here. He says, of course, the polygraph is just an American thing. In other countries, they can just beat the answers out of you. But that doesn't actually work that well. Tim Jenkins says, yeah, people will say anything. If you're being beaten or tortured, you'll say whatever you think they need to hear to make it stop. Nobody says, is there a way to cheat the lie detector test? Well, we talked about the countermeasures just a little earlier. And there's two ways to do that. You can listen to that portion, I guess, yourself. But yeah, there are some ways to countermand it. They're not guaranteed to beat it, but they have been proven effective in the past. Crappy at Life's here. He says, H2BH, happy to be here. Sky says, that's like the whole point of a lifestyle polygraph is to get information to blackmail people if they were to try and defect. Kind of. They use it as a cudgel. They use it as a threat. Tim Jenkinson said, truth serum, sodium pentothal. Yes. Tim Jenkinson also says polygraph seems about as useful as those stupid devices they use in ghost hunting TV shows. Yeah. The e-meter. Yeah. Wade Curtis says, I never lie because I'm an American, not some damn commie. Well done, Wade. Gene says, liar, liar, pants on fire test must be used more. Oh, boy. Tim Jenkinson says, Jerry Springer and shows like it. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Tim, because lie detection has a long and storied history in mythology, fairy tales. Modern fiction uses it to prove things more easily than are scientifically plausible. But notable instances of polygraph use include daytime TV talk shows, You are not the... Numerous TV shows have been called lie detector or featured the device. The first lie detector TV show aired in the 1950s, and it was created and hosted by Ralph Andrews, the host of This Is Your Life. In the 60s, he produced a series of specials hosted by legendary attorney Melvin Belli. In the 1970s, the show was hosted by Jack Anderson. In 1983, Columbia Pictures Television put on a syndicated series hosted by none other than F. Lee Bailey. In 1998, TV producer Mark Phillips put Lie Detector back on the air on the Fox networks. On that program, host Marcia Clark questioned Mark Furman about the allegation that he planted the bloody glove. In 2005, Phillips produced Lie Detector as a series for the Pax and Ion networks, and some of the guests included Paula Jones. In the UK, the Jeremy Kyle Show used it extensively. Fox had a game show called The Moment of Truth, where they're asked personal questions about things days before the show while hooked to a polygraph. On the show, they get asked the same questions in front of a studio audience and members of their family. So they have to give the same answer. Maury Povich uses it. Steve Wilkos uses it. In episode 93 of the U.S. science TV show Mythbusters, the hosts attempted to fool the polygraph by using pain when answering truthfully to prove one of the countermeasures. They also attempted to beat it by thinking pleasant thoughts when lying and thinking about stressful things when telling the truth. The history of the polygraph is the subject of the documentary film The Lie Detector, which first aired on American Experience. Incidentally, American Experience on PBS is just incredible. The U.S. military, by the way, has deployed a handheld polygraph. I could go over some very notable cases of the polygraph being used and most of them not working. One of the biggest examples is the polygraph failed to catch Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. Another suspect allegedly failed a given lie detector test, and Ridgway passed it. He passed a polygraph in 1984. He confessed almost 20 years later when he was confronted with real evidence, DNA evidence. Conversely, many innocent people have been known to fail polygraphs. Yes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I got to tell you about the polygraph. Let's see, what do we got going on here? Doopa-doopa-doo is here. Always good to see her. Says, hello, Tom in chat. Jean says, hey, doopa-doopa-doo. People saying hi, people saying hi, people saying hi. The most cheerful chat room on the internet as verified by independent sources. Paula Graff Jones. Now stop it. Who put that in there? Goat did. I should have known. Tim Jenkinson was, since I was going to mention Jeremy Kyle, as that show was canceled after someone did a bad thing to themselves after it gave false information about them. Yes. Yes. There's a lot of instances of it not working on guilty people and working on innocent people. There's paragraphs of it. I could go through a bunch more if you'd like me to. I have a tremendous amount of information about it. In 1986, Bill Wagerly was suspected of murdering his wife, Vicky Wagerly, because he failed 2 polygraph tests, one given by the police, the other by an expert that he himself had hired, although he was neither arrested or convicted of her demise. In March of 2004, evidence surfaced connecting her death to the serial killer now known as BTK. And he was exonerated, but polygraph said differently. Yeah. Here's someone else, I believe it might have been Julian Zeeser, mentioned earlier in our program. In the Watts family murders, Christopher Watts failed one such polygraph test and subsequently confessed to doing in his wife and his 2 children. So there are times when a polygraph, probably largely based on the perception that they are conclusive, they are effective. And people do become prime suspects when they fail a lie detector test, because law enforcement is one of the organizations that places the greatest amount of trust in a lie detector test. Speaking of lie detector tests, coming up this week on the Tom Gulley Show, tomorrow night we will be covering the Station nightclub fire, also known as the Great White Concert Fire, where Great White was playing, 100 people killed by a fire started on stage. We will cover that in detail. On Wednesday, we will cover the 1919 Black Sox scandal, betting scandal. On Thursday, we'll tell you about Michelle Ann Harris. That's an unsolved missing person. Her husband was tried 4 times, twice convicted, and then finally acquitted. He's walking around today. And then on Sunday, we will discuss the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. I ain't lying. See if I don't. We have no super chats, no memberships, no nothing. We have no Terry Nee, the guy that requested this topic. Isn't that just like Terry Nee? But unless I see something else rocking in the chat room, we're going to put a sock in this thing. We are. We're going to end it. And I will figure out what song to play. Unless someone asks for a specific song, I'm going to play Happy to Be Here. So that's what's going to happen. No mention of Pinocchio, says Julian Zeeser. Yes, the Geppetto testing method is very effective in Italy. If his nose grows, he's a lion. Tim Jenkins says, take care, Tom. Have a good night. Tim, good to see you. Who's on top of the table right now? I'm trying to remember. But we play Liverpool on Thursday, so we'll see what happens there. We will see what happens there. With all that being said, I'm looking at that old clock on the wall. Right over there. It says, like the Reverend Al Green, it's time for me to get on up out of here. You do not have to go home, but you can't. Oh, my goodness gracious. Doopa with a very generous $5 donation. Thank you, Dupa. Have a good night, everyone, she says. When's the camera episode, Tom? It's coming up. Oh, Goat with $2.99. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. And thank you to those listening on our audio podcast, which is picking up a little steam. We're picking up a little steam. And glad to have you audio podcast folks on board with us too. You rock. You rock. Gene says, night, Mr. Gulley in chat. Good night to you all. Fist bump. Dupa is fist bumping goat. Yeah, you guys rock. Anyway, I hope you've all been happy to be here. And in that spirit, I am going to play the song by the lovely and talented Leon Kennedy. And it is about our show, and it's called Happy to Be Here. Until next time, we'll see you next time.
Early in the morning, daylight coming through. Coffee on the console, red lights next to blue. Got a voice that settles in, easy, calm and true. The man from Gulley next to you. He's got stories in the static, time in his hands, turning ordinary moments into things you understand. You know I'm happy to be here. Tom is thinking again. Got the chat leaning closer to hear where he's been. You know I'm happy to be here. Feel the calm he sends when he smiles like that. You know the day begins. Riding waves, late shows rolling on. Voices in the darkness till the break of dawn. The podcast king commands his mic next to him.